our senior counsel for global affairs, Mike Pompeo, is joining us, former Secretary of State and CIA director, and he's got a new post up. And I always want to remind people, he's also writing exclusive content for us at ACLJ.org, and a new post up called New Emails Show the Biden Team was more focused on promoting woke agenda than addressing the murder of countless Christians in Nigeria. And so, Secretary Pompeo, you have this piece up at ACLJ breaking some news out of a FOIA we sent to the State Department on their decision to take Nigeria off the countries of particular concern list, which you had placed Nigeria on. As a background, just remind people and our listeners why you did take that step as Secretary of State to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern.
Well, thanks. Yeah. By the way, the ACLJ did amazing work with this FOIA request. They did really good stuff that highlighted a few central facts which underpin the work that I did as Secretary of State. We knew, and we know to this day, that the government in Nigeria is permitting Christians to be killed, to be persecuted inside of Nigeria. Some 90% of persecuted Christians killed in the last months have been in that particular place. We often think about China. We think about northern Iraq. We think about places which have been really troubled for Christians. Nigeria is really at the center of that so much today. I can't figure out why the Biden administration walked away from them, other than I did see when I was Secretary of State, Jordan, the bureaucrats inside the State Department want to walk away from anything having to do with religion. They don't view that as central to freedom and human dignity. Instead, they focus on other things. They focus on gender and racial issues, instead of what we know to be true, that to deliver security for America, religious freedom needs to be front and center. And one of the places that is most at risk today around the world is, in fact, in Nigeria. And you all did great work figuring that out.
Look at countries that have robust religious liberty laws. There's not a ton of them, but when you look at the countries that do, those are the freest and fairest countries in the world, typically. I mean, Secretary Pompeo, I think that it's bizarre to me that even inside the State Department, they don't want to recognize just that bottom line truth that you have. That will lead to more freedom, more diversity, more opinion, different thoughts, a safer place to have those different opinions and thoughts, and just a kind of a better respect for the systems of law and government and society. But instead, trying to put those on the back burner, even though we know it's kind of the basis of all rights. If you've truly got religious liberty, you likely have freedom of speech. You likely have the freedom to organize. You likely have a whole host of freedoms that you might not have in your country because it might not have a constitution, but that you have those kind of rights respected. When the Biden administration took office, they removed Nigeria from the list immediately. And we took action at the ACLJ through that FOIA to find out why. And we're starting to receive documents which expose their shift in priorities. What sticks out from this batch of documents that we received?
Yeah, I hinted it in my opening comments, Jordan. Just their absolute utter failure to being able to talk about religious freedom around the world. They're happy to create social programs that try to get at diversity or equity or inclusion. In those emails, you start to see that. They're thinking about your money, U.S. taxpayer money, going to programs in Nigeria. And rather than in protecting Christians or protecting people of every faith, it's about, can we voice some diversity program? Can we do some woke project to make their nation better? And Jordan, you hit on it importantly. This matters to me as someone who's a Christian, who's a person of faith. I want everyone to be able to practice their faith, but it mattered to me as Secretary of State as well, from a security perspective. Freer nations that protect basic human rights and basic human dignity, are much less likely to be in a place that causes our country to have to go to take real risks to our kids, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen and Marines. There is a direct line between nations with more religious tolerance and basic security for the United States of America. And the State Department, in the emails you're uncovering, clearly doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to think about it, wants to make sure that we are flying rainbow flags instead of protecting the human dignity to which each of us is entitled as a result of our having been made by our Creator.
Again, when you have that religious liberty in a country, that's likely going to be a country that's friendly to the United States. It's likely going to be a country that's not invading other countries and wars of aggression. And if there is a war of aggression, it's likely going to be a country that joins your side. And it doesn't have to mean we share the exact same faith, but that we respect faith to an extent that we respect the individual rights of people. It's kind of the core of the natural law system that our entire system of law is based on. Open Doors is a great organization that reports on Christian persecution. A report that last year that 90% of Christians murdered for their faith were killed in Nigeria, which is a country where about half the population is Christian. It's a huge country, but half the population is Christian. Leading up to the decision to remove Nigeria from the CPC, the State Department was considering funding a documentary meant to penetrate and analyze the complex and rather phony religious charade that has come to define a large part of Nigerian society. So what does that tell you about the administration's priorities?
Jordan, that's worse than just ignoring it. That's actual hostility to people of faith. And I saw this in the debates when I had a great colleague, Sam Brownback, who was our head of religious freedom, ambassador for religious freedom of the State Department. As Ambassador Brownback and I were working on this project, trying to take all the facts on board, you could watch State Department officials deeply uncomfortable talking about faith. They wanted to describe this conflict to rural, urban. They wanted to describe it as tribal conflict. In fact, the folks being killed are Christians, and they are being killed because of their faith. And it was unambiguous about that. And so we wanted to identify that. The State Department's designation as a country of particular concern is simply a statement saying you must do better. Our expectation is that you will do better, be more tolerant of religious faith, and then begins to impose burdens on them if they don't get it right. It's so unfortunate. My guess is that the risk to Christians has only increased and will only continue to increase because of the State Department's decision to remove them from this list. And the fact that the ACLJ has now uncovered documents shining a light on what the State Department did in the face of the cold, hard reality of religious intolerance in Nigeria is a really important undertaking. And the ACLJ did glorious work there.
The piece is by Secretary Pompeo, and he writes exclusive content for the ACLJ. This piece is Pompeo. New emails show Biden team more focused on promoting woke agenda than addressing murder of countless Christians in Nigeria. It gets me to my next question, which is that the domestically, how this impacts us, when the administration actively decides to promote this woke agenda globally, instead of keeping policies in place to end persecution. Like before you can even get to these conversations about woke policies, you got to end the basics like killing people because of their religious faith. But then how does that then impact us here at home?
Goodness, in so many ways, one of which we've talked about. Other nations that are in a good place doing the thing right, say, if America can't get it right, if America can't be a force for good as it moves around the world, if instead it's trying to impose some American idea of diversity, equity, inclusion that the progressive left has tried to adopt in ways that are run deeply at odds with our American tradition, our founders' ideas, it diminishes our place in the world. It diminishes American leadership. When our diplomats are out focused exclusively on climate change and gender identity issues and racial equality issues, and instead of on the things that actually are fundamental to human dignity, it undermines our role, our capacity to lead in the world, Jordan. And that's a more dangerous place for every single American. It impacts all of us.
I wanted to turn to one issue which I think is near and dear to so many Americans. That's government overreach as well inside our own country. It's breaking news out of the Supreme Court today in a 9-0 decision. We don't always see a lot of those, especially with this court, and especially when it comes to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. But we have what's in place, an EPA policy that is called basically Waters of the United States. And the EPA tried to allege that these individuals' land, they built a home near a ditch that fed into a creek, which fed into Priest Lake, a navigable interstate lake. And the EPA wanted to have them ban them from living at that home and ordered them to pay a $40,000 per day fine. And what the Supreme Court was able to do is go back and say, no, you have gone way too far in defining waterways of the United States when you're defining a ditch that feeds into a creek, which then feeds into a lake. And so this pushback again in a 9-0 decision gives me some hope that the wokeness hasn't made its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Oh, my goodness, Jordan. This is actually wonderful. I worked on this issue 10 years ago when I was a member of Congress. The Waters of the U.S. rule has been controversial. The Obama administration wanted to put it through. The Biden administration finally did. Here's what's great. Think about how nutty this had to be for 9 justices to all agree this is nutty and unlawful and indecent and a government overreach. Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, these folks are not ones that are inclined to rule against Biden administration government overreach. They use every technique they can to reshape the rules in a way that asserts a progressive agenda, and they didn't here. So think about how bad this rule was. Second thing is, I've now had a chance to read just the front end of the rule. I think this bodes well for those of us who believe in requiring Congress to actually pass laws and actually direct what it is that the government can do, instead of these big ambiguous rules that allow progressive presidents to run amok and regulate our lives in ways that are inappropriate and inconsistent with the Constitution. So this matters for farmers. This matters for every property owner. This matters because now the waters of the U.S. will actually be waters